Hello, everybody, and happy Saturday, or whatever day you listen to this video. Today, it is June 14th, 2025, and there's a lot of protesting going on in the United States and around the world for the No King's Day. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about the possibility that we may have shifted a timeline. A lot of us have believed that we shifted a timeline back in November of 2024 when the outcome was not as we expected it to be. And we've been enduring this timeline for now 5 or 6 months. And now there has been some speculation that there has been a timeline shift. I think it was Thursday. So I want to just kind of move into that energy and see what you think, and also familiarize you with some concepts that perhaps will help you ascertain whether you believe you've brought yourself into that timeline shift as well. So the concept of the timeline shift is that our reality isn't fixed, but a fluid, ever-changing construct. There are some people who believe, my dad being one of them, that he was a fatalist, which means everything is predestined and you can't change anything. Well, that's not at all what this is. This is a constant constructing world that we live in that can shift and change by any number of things that occur. So many people believe that significant events or shifts in consciousness can propel us into this new timeline. And I tend to believe that myself, because if you get a tipping point, you come up at if everybody believes the same way at a tipping point, then it can go over and there will be a paradigm shift, which could also be a timeline shift. And I know this may seem incredibly difficult to prove to anybody, but it has a lot to do with our vibrations, our beliefs, and how we find out the circumstances we find ourselves in. So it's important to talk about. This idea has been circulating in spiritual or esoteric communities for years, but is it more than just a theory? What do you think? I'm going to let you be the decider of your reality once I finish reading this. What if we haven't shifted a timeline? And what if our reality is changing in ways we're still trying to understand? Well, we don't always understand it when we're going through it. There's a German word, Zeitgeist, Zeitgeist. It means the spirit of the age. And you cannot know what the Zeitgeist is when you are in it. It's only something that can be determined as a reflection or looking back at it. We can, however, say that there are recognized things that happen that can point to outcomes that may come from what's going on in the reality in which we live due to the history of it happening in the past. So there's that fine line here. Recognizing the subtle changes in our reality can be really challenging for us because we are not used to that. However, we are used to finding patterns and consistency and making those determinations because we're wired to do that. We're wired in our brains to try to make sense of things as they're happening. It's like something happened. As many times you hear, for instance, that there was just recently a plane crash in India, and it just doesn't make sense to us until we see the pictures and until we see the devastation, as much as we don't really want to see it. Or if somebody says, they've lost somebody or somebody has passed, and there's that period of time when you want the proof. You've got to have the proof because things have shifted so dramatically in a very short period of time. It's really difficult for us to take it all in. That's because it makes us difficult. It is a difficult thing to notice when things aren't quite adding up. You might experience strange synchronicities, unexplained changes in relationships and career paths, to shifts in our physical health and our well-being. One day we may feel really good. The next day we find out, for instance, that we've been battling a disease that we didn't know anything about, and we now have to work to combat that disease. Whereas before we knew it, we weren't concerned about it at all. So there's a dramatic shift from health to illness, or from illness to health. I mean, this is just something that is incredibly difficult for a lot of people to comprehend, because again, we want to make sense of that just doesn't make sense. That's something we say an awful lot. Okay. These shifts also can change relationships, and it's as if the rules of the game have changed, and we are trying to find out what the new objective is. People often feel disconnected from their past selves, or struggling to make sense of current circumstances. Some even experience what can only be described as waking up to a new reality, as if the veil has been lifted from our eyes. There are many people who are not choosing to wake up to a new reality in a lot of ways. And one day when they do, they will be looking through a different set of eyes, if in fact they actually do awaken. I think there was a profound shift that happened to most of us in 2020 when we were on lockdown. We couldn't go to work. We had to wear masks. We had to clean everything. We worried about our family, the elderly. We worried about going out. We worried about masking. We worried about people picking on us for wearing masks. All of that timeline shift was huge. One day we're at work, we're doing our job, and the next day we're at home and we cannot leave, particularly if you're over a certain age or had a health condition that would render you vulnerable to something like that. Theories about timeline shifts abound, ranging from scientific to spiritual. Some point to the increasing complexity of our global problems as evidence we're navigating a new reality. And I don't know about you, but what was going on in Los Angeles in the month of June 2025, and a subsequent bombardment by Israel of Iran, that was a timeline shift. Prior to that, many of us were not even aware that this was something that was happening unless we were deeply embedded into the news. And many of us have stayed away from that for that very reason, that we don't want to hear all this terrible stuff. Others share anecdotes of experiencing abrupt changes that defy logical explanation. For instance, finding yourself in a place you've never been without remembering how you got there, or maybe driving home and not remembering driving home, or encountering people who seem to know you, even though you say you've never met. Cultural references from ancient myths to modern-day science fiction also hint of the possibility of multiple realities and parallel universes. These stories and ideas combine and contribute to a growing sense our reality is not fixed. And this is something also we've discussed about the Mandela effect and other things that happened that are not exactly how we remember them. And yet a lot of people feel that way about it. Like they remember it being this way, but it wasn't this way. It was actually this way. And there are a lot of people that will argue about it and continue to argue about it because they don't believe that to be true. So was that a timeline shift? I really don't know, but it seems possible. One compelling piece of evidence is this Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember facts differently. And it comes from Nelson Mandela, where people thought he died in prison, while others say that he died after becoming president of South Africa. So remember that I have discussed this before in some of the other ideas on another video, and it is very compelling. The evidence is pretty interesting. Another person says that she woke up one morning to find her entire apartment rearranged with no recollection of doing it herself. And experience like these leave us questioning. I had another friend tell me that they lived in the country on a farm, and they looked out their window one day and they didn't recognize their land. It was different looking than the current reality in which they were living. And there was farm equipment that was outside that was outdated, very old, and from a different century. Trees where there weren't trees, no trees where there were trees. And was that a timeline shift? It didn't stay that way, but it was something that was seen by the eye of the viewer, who is not mentally ill, as far as I know, or having any kind of delusions or taking mushrooms for that matter. This is real. This is a real thing. Even people who you don't have to believe in it to have it happen to you. It can happen. So the feeling of having shifted into a new timeline can be exhilarating. And for some people, it can be very terrifying. It depends on what your view of timeline shifting is. It's a bit like being on a train that's changed tracks and you're not sure where you're headed now or why you're headed in that way. What happened? This sense of disorientation can lead to a period of introspection and self-discovery while we try to make sense of things. And we did this during 2020. How did this virus occur? Why were people dying in the streets? I mean, it was immediately evident that there was something that happened that no one was prepared or knew anything about for the longest time. And I believe a timeline shift happened in the 1980s when AIDS became a deadly disease. There had to be a shift in the view of things. It's almost as though there was a shift in the view of things to introduce the idea that we all don't particularly live the same kinds of lives. And in some cases, it appeared that it was never going to go away. There was never going to be anything, because at the time, the president, Ronald Reagan, didn't really want to say that there was anything happening. And we've seen that in other instances as well with the governments. There is a very fascinating article that I read, and it was someone else's description of a timeline shift. But this is something in a personal timeline shift, because we can have those too. This person tells me that your perspective has changed, plain and simple. You realize you are living in the now. You've always been living in the now, but you didn't realize it before. You appreciate and are grateful to be in the now, be it a difficult lesson or viewing your child, a brand new baby, for the first time, or anything that you're looking at and seeing with the different eyes. So it can occur in your own mind. It doesn't have to be something outside that changes dramatically to still be a timeline shift for you. You not only have optimism for the future, but you realize you are orchestrating it through your thoughts, words, and actions. In other words, thoughts are things. You have manifested what it is you believed would happen. That's why it's so important to think about things in a very clear, positive way. It's vital in order to see that in your reality. You realize your past is malleable based on how you view yourself and the past. You have forgiven yourself and lived life free of guilt and subconscious trauma. Perhaps you're forgiving your parents for any real or imagined injuries that you feel they were responsible for. And you realize they were doing the best that they could at the time, and that living in that kind of thought pattern serves no one in the now, because you're living in the past by holding on to that. You have the ability to ignore the mind and its incessant thoughts. We don't always have to be thinking. You can look out a window and just be, without shame, guilt, judgment, or opinions. In other words, you can say, I am enough, I am here, and I am fine. You realize you're more than your mind. You are nothing at the same time. And you relax. Timeline shifts don't have to be terrifying, scary, or confusing, but it all matters how you view it. Thank you very much, and have a most beautiful day and weekend ahead.